The mayor still says that the taxis are being impounded in line with national legislation and not the city's bylaws, as claimed by Minister Chikunga yesterday.
I think we've been very clear that the taxis are not being impounded under the bylaws. They're being impounded under the NLTA, the National Land Transport Act. That has always been the case. It's absolutely true that we have stepped up enforcement. We have become more stricter and vigorous in enforcement, and that is so that we can properly protect commuters, passengers in those taxis, and other road users. So if the message has not been clear, let it be clear. We stand on the side of road users, of customers, of commuters, of passengers who need to get around the city, not on the side of taxi drivers who choose to break the law. Of course, there are many law-abiding taxi drivers, so let me be clear on that. They are not every one of them is a lawbreaker, but those that break the law endanger the lives of people on the road. South Africa has unacceptably high traffic deaths, road deaths, and a very large number of them involve taxis. So we do have a duty, and I think the whole of government has a duty to stand up for the safety of people using the road, and that is why we are using the impoundment as the most important mechanism.
For more on this, let's speak now to Cape Town's Mayoral Committee Member for Transport, Rob Quintas. A very good evening to you, sir. Grateful for your time. So what has been the involvement of the city at this stage in these negotiations? Because at some point it was said that you were not participating.
So the city has been very much involved in negotiations. I personally have been attending on behalf of the city. I attended basically a 4-hour meeting with the minister, followed by a 4-hour meeting with Santako on Friday evening. The meeting was chaired by the MEC for mobility in the province. And from my side, I represented the city and the city stance, plus trying to negotiate terms with Santako. I re-met with Santako on Sunday for another sort of 2.5 hours. And we have been corresponding with Santako in writing on a nearly daily basis, sometimes more than once a day. Where the city's position is that we will not engage in face-to-face negotiations when there is ongoing violence and disruption on the streets of Cape Town as a result of taxi-related volatility.
Well, there appears to have been a lull in that between yesterday and today. So is that not condition enough? Are those conditions not conducive?
So we have already communicated with Santako in writing that we intend to meet with them tomorrow. The offer is on the table for a meeting tomorrow at 12 noon. But that meeting will also be conditional on what transpires during the peak hour morning rush. So if we see, as we did see on Tuesday morning, where we had vehicles blocking some of our major roads, creating havoc, there were still burning tires and blockades in certain areas, then unfortunately that face-to-face will no longer be on the table, and we will return to correspondence until such time as that law and order is resolved. We have constantly been urging Santako to return firstly to return to operations. It is their choice and prerogative as to whether they strike or not. However, we would appreciate seeing them operating their services and serving the commuters that need to get to work. No work, no pay. It's affecting a lot of people, and of course their own drivers. Very many of the operators and the sort of taxi bosses in the industry, the leadership, they are able to withstand a week or so potentially of not operating. Their drivers, however, live day to day, hand to mouth, and I'm sure there's tremendous pressure on them as well.
So are you, at this stage, Mr. Quintas, are you basically hoping that those conditions will be what basically leads to concessions by Santako, so they buckle because financially they just can't keep going? Because if the negotiations are to continue, yesterday they seem to have been calm, there were no major incidents reported. Why can't there be a solution today before the almost 1 million children who was out of class on just yesterday, in fact, are due to go back to school tomorrow, before the people who need to go into the city for work and other appointments need to get on taxis tomorrow? Why can't this be resolved before then?
So the negotiations have been going on in writing with correspondence throughout today, even. We have communicated our willingness to meet tomorrow, pending a peaceful process for the rush hour morning peak. The taxi industry has also responded back and have maintained a demand that the city have a moratorium of impoundment on any vehicle for a period of time. Now, the city is non-negotiable on that. We are certainly not going to do any punitive impoundments, i.e., if your vehicle is roadworthy, if your driver has a driver's license, a public driver's permit, and the vehicle has an operating license, and if the driver is driving in a fashion that is not reckless and does not endanger the passengers in that minibus taxi or endanger the other road users, then that vehicle has absolutely nothing to fear. It is only those vehicles that contravene the aforementioned items, which quite frankly are in place to protect the safety of commuters and other road users. Only those vehicles that contravene the aforementioned point will have anything to fear.
But what the operators claim is that basically they've now had their drivers targeted for reasons outside of, for example, those to do with valid licenses, the roadworthiness of the vehicle. So they say you've simply gone far beyond what national legislation requires. Can you tonight say confidently that there have not been cases where they have been targeted, perhaps unfairly, and vehicles seized for reasons other than those to do with licensing, the permits, and roadworthiness?
So the National Land Transport Act, which it's unfortunate that Mr. Chikunga is not familiar with that legislation, which lies within the National Department of Transport, it's national government policy, speaks very clearly and broadly to what is impoundable. Okay, and the city also not only takes its lead in enforcement from that, but also according to the provincially set operating license conditions for minibus taxi operators. Okay, so that is a very broad legislation which provides the discretionary ability for the city to impound for any of the infringements. So when one looks at how broad that legislation is, we have been impounding according to that legislation, both the NLTA and the operating license conditions. However, what we have offered to Santaco time and time again is that we will sit with them when there has been a period of prolonged calm, and we will start to go through the broad criterion that allow for impoundment. We will go through that with them. We will take their hands, we will sit down, find agreement with legal advisors, with province, with themselves, to find those items which we can all agree on do not necessarily require the full might of impoundment. And
what are those?
So largely, which is within the NLTA and within the operating license conditions, things such as having a side view mirror, which is not there. I mean, and that's not ideal for road use when you're taking a group of passengers onto a highway. However, possibly that could be only relevant for a fine as opposed to impoundment. There are other items such as some of the certification of the drivers, certainly not the driver's license, but some others. We are prepared to engage with them along with the provincial government and start making those decisions together. The requirement is that they return to the engagement table officially. They withdrew in writing from that engagement about 2 weeks ago. I co-chaired a bi-weekly minibus taxi task team engagement session with the MEC. We were co-chairs. And Santaco withdrew from that in writing roughly 2 weeks ago. And since then, we have seen the outcomes of the initial snap strike on the Thursday, which left commuters stranded with nowhere, so with very difficult means to get home. And we want to return to that table. We have asked for that over and over again in the past week, and to discuss. And we've really gone through a fine-tooth comb with the industry, face-to-face in meetings that I have either co-chaired or been present at. that we will definitely look at some of what we can refer to as minor infringements that are allowable for impoundment according to the NLTA, but where we will maybe have a standard operating procedure within the city that we will make those, instead of impounding immediately for some of the minor infringements, we can look at fining only. But that decision can only be made together with the industry once there has been a period of calm.
That means, does it, that the city realizes that perhaps taking the most drastic action in those instances was not the right strategy to take?
So I think it's important to really put across to the viewers at home is that the city has always had a zero tolerance approach to the items that endanger the commuters that are in those minibus taxis as well as other road users. So the ethos has been that with applying the legislation as it exists, and it is our prerogative to apply, it's discretionary, we are constantly hoping that the taxi operators, the owners of the vehicles, will do their own housekeeping and ensure that their vehicles are roadworthy, ensure that their drivers have all the necessary certification and licenses that are required, and then also have the necessary discussions with those who they entrust with keys to their many vehicles to drive commuters around, that they are driving within accordance to the law and in accordance with safety.
What I'm trying to get to, though, is if the option of a fine was always on the table, for example, for someone not having a side view mirror, why it was that the action of impounding the vehicle was where the city seemed to have leaned to most. Why not start with the fines and then, only when you realize that doesn't work, impound the vehicles?
Okay, so there have been fines. In fact, it's basically a 1:50 ratio of fining versus impoundment. So very often vehicles are pulled over, I'm talking minibus taxis are pulled over, and they are in fact fined and not impounded. And that ratio is approximately 1:50. So for every 50 taxis that are pulled over, only one of them gets impounded. The others are fined in accordance with whatever contravention there has been. So we have been looking at the very serious ones already and making it a standard protocol. So bear in mind, there are close to 50,000 fines that have been allocated to the minibus taxi industry over the past month period. In that same month period, there have been approximately 1.5 or so 1,000 taxis impounded. So it really is a case of 1:50. We're not impounding every time for all things, always.
When do you decide to impound?
Say again?
When then do you decide to impound versus issuing a fine? What happens in those situations where the vehicle is taken?
So it is a standard protocol where if the contravention has occurred and it is of a serious nature, the vehicle is then impounded. It goes from there to the municipal pounds, where there's firstly a fine which is provided to the driver on the night, and then an electric copy is uploaded onto our EPIC system so that the cause for the impoundment is detailed. In other words, what infringement of the NLTA or operating license conditions got it seen, fined and taken off the road. Once there, it then becomes subject to the traffic court, where the operator is able to go and petition the traffic court to have it released if they feel it was impounded unfairly. They also have the opportunity to make representation to the courts, and it becomes a national prosecuting authority decision as to whether to impound or not. So this also brings me back to one of the first things you said in the beginning of this interview, which is that the minister has requested or instructed or said that the vehicles must be released from impounding. Now, we are not able to do that when it is an item that is with the traffic courts. That is a national prosecuting authority decision. And the minister does not have the jurisdiction to compel or instruct the national prosecuting authority what to do.
Okay.
The city, on the other hand, has made commitments that we will make representation to the national prosecuting authority by the traffic courts to release some of the vehicles that have been impounded that may have in fact been impounded by any officer utilizing his discretion that has been impounded for those reasons that I mentioned that would constitute minor infringements. We've made that offer very clear to the industry since last week already, and it still stands. But certainly there's no compulsion or instruction to release any vehicle. by any minister. The mayor can't even instruct that at a municipal level. The minister can't instruct it nationally. There's a process. There's legislative processes which the minister seems to not be aware of, despite being in a position which she is a custodian of all legislation relating to public transport or transport in general.
Cape Town Mayoral Committee Member for Transport, Rob Quintas, good to speak to you. Thank you.